My name is Lucille Brown, and if you've ever stayed in one of those fancy hotels with gold rugs and soft beds, chances are someone like me cleaned up after you. For more than 40 years, I pushed that squeaky cart down endless hallways, wearing the same gray uniform that never seemed to fit quite right. My back ached, my knees cracked, and my hands stayed smelling like bleach no matter how hard I scrubbed. People would walk right past me like I was invisible, like I wasn't even human, just part of the furniture. Another shadow in their shiny world. Sometimes they wouldn't even look me in the eye when they tossed a towel on the floor or called me, "Hey Maid," like that was my name. I'd smile, nod, and whisper a quiet yes, ma'am, or yes, sir. But deep inside, I used to wonder if this was all I was meant to be. A woman who cleaned up everyone else's mess while her own dreams collected dust in the corner. I remember being 21 when I started that job, young, hopeful, and fresh out of Georgia with nothing but a suitcase, a bus ticket. Lucille, you better work hard, but don't you ever forget you were born for more. I didn't know what more looked like back then. I just knew I had bills to pay and a baby to feed after my husband walked out on me. So I took that first cleaning job at a hotel downtown. Big chandeliers, marble floors, folks walking around like they owned the world, and there I was, wiping fingerprints off the glass, making beds for people who'd never think twice about who tucked in their sheets. I used to stand by the window after I finished a room and stare at the city lights, whispering to myself one day, "Lucille, you'll walk through a room like this and it'll be yours." But dreams don't come easy when you're a black woman with calloused hands and a soft heart in a world that doesn't see you. Some of the supervisors would laugh at me when I tried to share an idea about how to clean faster or safer. They'd say, "You just do what you're told, girl. Leave the thinking to us." Even some of my coworkers used to joke, "Lucille, you talk like you own this place." Not yet, baby, not yet. But I had hope, and sometimes that's the only thing that keeps you breathing. Still, there were nights when I'd go home to my little apartment with sore feet and tears on my cheeks, wondering if I was foolish for dreaming. I'd look at my hands cracked from chemicals, dry from scrubbing, and think, these hands build comfort for others, but what have they built for me? Every time I wanted to quit, I'd remember Mama's face, how she used to say, "God don't waste no struggle. One day, all that cleaning you do gonna mean something." I didn't know what she meant then, but I held on to those words like they were gold, because somewhere deep down, I knew I wasn't meant to die with a mop in my hand. I was meant to rise with one. So before I tell you how I went from scrubbing toilets to signing checks, I want you to sit for a minute and think about where you're hearing this story from. Maybe you're at work, maybe you're sitting in your car, maybe you're tired too, but trust me, you ain't too old and it ain't too late. This ain't just the story of a maid. It's the story of a woman who took the same chemicals that broke her skin and turned them into a business that changed her life. They used to laugh at me, call me nothing but help, but now, those same hotels buy my cleaning products by the truckload, and when I walk through their lobbies, they don't call me Maid anymore. They call me Mrs. Brown, CEO of Pure Shine Organics. Those first few years at the hotel taught me more about people than any school ever could. I saw the best and worst of humanity in those rooms. You'd be surprised what people leave behind, not just jewelry or wallets, but anger, secrets, sadness. I'd find love letters, whiskey bottles half empty, and sometimes tears still wet on the pillowcases. Every day I moved through other folks' lives like a ghost, cleaning up their stories but never getting to write my own. I remember one morning, I came in early because one of the girls called off. The manager, a tall, sharp man who always smelled like expensive cologne, looked at me and said, "Lucille, make sure you get every spot. We got VIPs today, and I don't want any complaints." He said it like a threat. I nodded and smiled, but inside, I felt that familiar sting, that quiet reminder that no matter how hard I worked, I was still invisible. Sometimes, I'd clean those fancy suites and hear folks talking about investments, real estate, and stocks, words that felt like another language to me. I didn't even know what a portfolio was back then, but I remember thinking, if I ever get a chance, I'm gonna learn what they're talking about. I wanted more than a paycheck that barely covered rent. I wanted freedom, the kind that doesn't come with a uniform or a time card. But for now, all I had was that cart, those bottles, and a prayer. It was around my 10th year at the hotel when I started noticing something strange. My hands were cracking worse than before, my skin burning even when I wore gloves. Some of the younger maids complained about rashes, coughing, headaches, and it hit me. Those harsh chemicals we used every day were poisoning us slowly. The label on one of the bottles read, "Use in well-ventilated area," but we didn't have windows in most rooms. Management didn't care. They just said, wear gloves and move faster. I remember going home one night, my hands so raw I could barely hold my dinner fork. I sat at my kitchen table, staring at those bottles, and thought, if these products clean so well, why do they hurt the people who use them? That question stayed with me for years. I didn't have the answer, but I had curiosity, and that curiosity became a quiet seed planted in my mind. I started reading labels on every bottle I touched, comparing ingredients, noticing patterns. I didn't know it then, but that was the beginning of everything. The pain in my hands, the smell of bleach in my nose, the exhaustion in my bones, all of it was pushing me towards something I couldn't yet see. And even though I didn't have a degree or a business plan, I had what my mama used to call good sense and God's timing. Sometimes at night, when I couldn't sleep, I'd imagine a world where women, like me, didn't have to get sick just to earn a living. I didn't tell anyone about those thoughts. They would have laughed. Who'd believe that Lucille, the maid, could one day make her own cleaning products? But as I'd sit there soaking my hands in warm water and olive oil, I'd whisper, one day, these hands will make something that don't hurt nobody. I didn't know how, or when, or where, but deep down I knew that something big was waiting for me, something that would turn my pain into purpose. It started small, like most dreams do, right there in my tiny apartment kitchen with a cracked linoleum floor and a leaky faucet that never stopped dripping. I didn't have no fancy lab, no expensive equipment, no big money backing me up. All I had were a few mason jars, an old wooden spoon, and a notebook I kept from my church's Sunday school. Every night after work, I'd sit at that kitchen table with tired eyes and aching hands, mixing a little baking soda here, a dash of vinegar there, adding lemon peel or lavender oil whenever I could afford some. I'd write down everything, how it smelled, how it looked, how it cleaned. Sometimes it worked, sometimes it didn't. My first batch left streaks on my mirror so bad, I thought I ruined the glass. But instead of quitting, I laughed. I said, well, Lucille, at least it smells better than bleach. My daughter Denise used to watch me and shake her head. Mama, she'd say, you've been cleaning all your life. Why you wasting your nights trying to make soap? I'd just smile and tell her, because I'm tired of cleaning with poison. Baby, she didn't understand it then. Nobody did. To them, I was just a maid trying to play scientist. Even some of my coworkers joked about it. They'd say, girl, you making potions now? I'd laugh along, but inside, I was serious. I wasn't just mixing soap. I was mixing my freedom. I failed a lot those first few months. Some batches turned slimy, others smelled too strong. One time, a jar exploded on me when I tried heating it up too fast. I jumped back, heart racing, soap splattered across my face. I remember sitting on the floor, shaking, thinking maybe they're right. Maybe I'm just wasting my time. But something in me refused to stop. I kept hearing Mama's words, God don't waste no struggle. So I cleaned up the mess, bandaged my hand, and started over again. Little by little, I began to understand things. The lemon oil cut through grease better. Vinegar killed odor without hurting my skin. I started replacing chemical-heavy cleaners at home with my own mixtures. And you know what? My apartment smelled like sunshine. Fresh. The first time my neighbor, Miss Thelma, came by, she asked Lucille, "What's that smell?" "Smells cleaner than bleach, but softer." I told her it was something I made, and she laughed. "Honey, you better patent that before someone else does." Even know what patent meant then, but her words lit something in me. Soon, I started giving away little jars to a few coworkers. They'd come back after a few days saying, "Lucille, that stuff really works." That was the first time in my life I felt like maybe, just maybe, I had something worth more than a paycheck. Still, I was scared. Who was I to start a business? I didn't even finish high school, but I kept thinking, the same folks who laughed at me for cleaning might one day have to buy what I made for cleaning. I didn't know it yet, but that thought would soon change my whole life. It took me almost a year before I got the courage to try selling what I made. I remember sitting at my kitchen table one night, staring at those 10 little mason jars filled with my homemade cleaner. I'd written Lucille's fresh touch on each one with a marker. Though the ink smudged a little from my shaky hands, I didn't have no fancy labels or brand name. Just a dream and a deep belief that what I made mattered. That next Saturday, I packed those jars in a cardboard box and caught the city bus to the local farmer's market. I couldn't afford a table, so I stood by the corner with my box open, smiling at strangers and saying, "Ma'am, would you like to try a safe, natural cleaner?" Most of them didn't even look at me. A few just waved their hand like I was bothering them. I stood there for hours, my feet hurting, my pride bruised, but I stayed, because that's what I'd done all my life, stayed, even when it hurt. Just when I was thinking about packing up and heading home, an older lady stopped. She picked up a jar, opened it, sniffed it, and said, "Smells like lemon pie, baby. Does it really clean?" I smiled and said, "Yes, ma'am, it does. Won't hurt your hands neither." She smiled back and handed me $5. That was my first sale. $5 might not sound like much, but that day I walked home like I'd just cashed $1 million check. I held that bill tight in my hand the whole ride home, whispering, "See, Lucille, they were wrong about you." I went back every weekend after that. Sometimes I sold a few jars, sometimes none. People laughed, called me the cleaning lady selling soap. One man even said, "Ain't nobody gonna buy that homemade junk." I smiled at him and said, "You just watch." I was scared I was wasting my time, scared I was chasing something too big for someone like me. But each time I wanted to quit, and I told myself, "Lucille, if you could scrub 1,000 floors for someone else, you can stand one more Saturday for yourself." It wasn't easy. I'd come home exhausted, sometimes in tears, wondering if I'd ever make it. The bills piled up. The electric company sent warnings. My daughter said, "Mama, maybe it's time to let it go." But I couldn't. I felt like God had given me this one shot to make something that was mine, something that could help others like me. So I started praying over those jars before I sold them, whispering, "Lord, if this is my path, bless it." Blessings started showing up. One of my regulars told her cousin, who worked at a small daycare. They tried my cleaner and loved it because it was safe for kids. Then that daycare told another one. And soon I was getting calls from all over the city asking, "You that lady with the natural cleaner?" The first time I heard someone say that lady with the cleaner, I cried, because for the first time in my life, people weren't calling me Maid. They were calling me by something I made. That was the day I realized this wasn't just a dream anymore. This was my beginning. The more my little cleaner spread, the more pressure came with it. I was still working full-time at the hotel, cleaning rooms during the day and making batches at night. My kitchen turned into a factory, bottles on the counter, vinegar smell in the air, lemon peels soaking in jars, baking soda dust floating like snow. Some nights I'd fall asleep sitting up at the table, spoon still in my hand. I'd wake up with my neck stiff and my heart pounding, realizing I had to be back at work in 2 hours. My body was breaking, but my spirit kept whispering, "Keep going, Lucille. You've come too far to stop now." But the truth was, I was running out of everything: energy, money, and faith. The more orders I got, the more materials I needed. And the more I spent, the more my savings disappeared. I tried asking the bank for a small loan, but they looked at me like I was crazy. One man even said, "Miss Brown, we can't just give out money for homemade soap." His words stung, but I smiled and said, "One day you'll wish you had." I walked out of that bank with tears in my eyes, clutching my purse like it was the only thing keeping me standing. Then came the worst week of my life. My landlord raised the rent. My daughter's car broke down. I got written up at the hotel for working too slow, even though I was doing double the rooms. I remember that Friday night clear as day. I came home, sat at my kitchen table, and stared at those empty jars. I felt like all the strength I'd ever had been squeezed out of me. I whispered, "Maybe they were right. Maybe I'm just a maid who dreamed too big." The tears came hard that night, the kind that make your chest hurt. But the next morning, something happened that changed everything. There was a knock at my door. When I opened it, there stood Miss Thelma, the same neighbor who'd laughed at my cleaner months ago. She held a piece of paper in her hand and said, "Lucille, I gave your cleaner to my niece. Works at the Midtown Hotel. Manager there, loved it. He wants to meet you." I stood there, frozen, my mind spinning. That was one of the biggest hotels in the city, the kind I used to dream of cleaning for just to make extra tips. Now someone wanted to buy from me. I didn't sleep that night. I stayed up praying, crying, and thanking God. I kept hearing my mama's voice, "God don't waste no struggle." And for the first time, I understood what she meant. Every mop I pushed, every night I came home too tired to eat, it had all been leading me right here. My product was good, my heart was clean, and my dream was real. The world just didn't know it yet. So I put on my best dress, the same one I wore to church on Easter Sunday, packed 3 bottles of my cleaner in a little basket, and told myself, "You ain't going to clean no more rooms today. Lucille, you're going to claim one." That Monday morning, I stood in front of the Midtown Hotel, heart thumping so hard I could hear it in my ears. I'd cleaned places like this for half my life, but never once walked in through the front doors as a guest. The marble floors shined so bright I could see my reflection. I almost turned back. I thought, what am I doing here? I'm just Lucille, the maid with a homemade cleaner. But then I caught sight of my reflection again. Tired eyes, cracked hands, and that same stubborn fire behind them. I straightened my shoulders and whispered, "You belong here now, Lucille. Walk like it." When I told the receptionist who I was there to see, she gave me that look, the kind I'd seen all my life. The one that said, "You don't belong here." She spoke slow, as if I wouldn't understand. "Do you have an appointment?" I smiled and said, "Yes, ma'am. Mr. Collins is expecting me." She hesitated, picked up the phone, then motioned for me to sit down. I sat there clutching my basket of bottles like it was gold. People passed by in suits and heels, and I could feel their eyes, curious. But I just smiled, praying under my breath. When Mr. Collins finally walked in, he looked surprised to see me. He was tall, white, wearing an expensive suit and a face that didn't smile easy. "So," he said, glancing at the basket, "you're the lady with the magic soap." I laughed softly and said, "Something like that, sir." He motioned for me to follow him into his office. It was big, with windows overlooking the city. I'd cleaned rooms smaller than that office. He sat down, crossed his arms, and said, "All right, Mrs. Brown. Show me what you got." My hands trembled a little as I took out one of my bottles. "This here," I said, "is made from all natural ingredients. Lemon oil, vinegar, baking soda, and a few other things I learned to mix just right. No harsh chemicals, no strong fumes. It cleans good, and it's safe for the hands that use it. He leaned back, skeptical. And you make this yourself? He asked. Yes, sir. Every bottle, right there in my kitchen. He chuckled, not mean, but doubtful. Well, that's something. But why would I buy this when we already have professional products? I took a deep breath and said, because, Mr. Collins, your cleaning staff are getting sick. I used to be one of them. I know what those chemicals do. You might not see it, but they feel it every day. He went quiet. I could see him thinking. Then I handed him a cloth and said, try it. He dabbed a little on his desk, wiped it once, and paused. Well, he muttered. It does work. I smiled and said softly, yes, sir. It does, and it don't burn your hands to prove it. He looked up at me then, really looked. After a long moment, he said, all right, Mrs. Brown, I'll order a few cases for testing. My heart almost stopped. I tried to keep calm, but inside I was screaming. He handed me a paper, saying, you get me a proper invoice, and we'll start small. I thanked him, shook his hand, and walked out of that office like my feet weren't even touching the ground. I remember stepping outside, the sun shining so bright I had to squint. I looked up at that hotel sign, the same kind I used to dust off in the lobbies, and I whispered, Mama, we made it. It wasn't millions yet, but it was my first real contract. My first time being respected, not for how well I cleaned a room, but for something I created. That day, I didn't feel like a maid anymore. I felt like a woman who had finally cleaned her way to her purpose. The next morning, I woke up before dawn. Same as always, but this time, it wasn't to put on a maid's uniform. It was to become something new. The paper from Mr. Collins lay on my kitchen table like a treasure map, reminding me of the promise I'd made to myself. No more cleaning other people's mess for pennies. This was my shot, and I wasn't about to miss it. I lined up my empty bottles, filled the sink with warm water, and started mixing. Lemon oil, baking soda, vinegar. My hands moved like a machine, steady and sure. But when I looked around that tiny kitchen, I realized just how impossible the task seemed. The hotel wanted 200 bottles in a week. I barely had space for 50. I almost laughed out loud at the thought. Lord, what did I just get myself into? I said to the ceiling, but I kept going. Every night after that, I worked till my hands hurt. The whole house smelled like lemon and vinegar, and my neighbors started asking if I was running a restaurant. When I told them what I was doing, some of them laughed. Lucille, you too old for all that, one lady said. You should be resting, not chasing pipe dreams. I just smiled and said, dreams don't expire, sweetheart. People just stop believing in them. On the third night, I was dead tired, bottles everywhere, labels smudged, and I almost cried out of frustration. That's when my grandniece Keisha knocked on the door. She was 16, full of energy, and always nosy about what I was up to. When she saw what I was doing, her eyes lit up. Auntie, you making this yourself? I nodded, too tired to explain much. She picked up a bottle, sniffed it, and said, it smells good. Can I help? I wanted to say no, but the truth was, I needed all the help I could get. So I taught her how to mix, how to pour, how to label. By midnight, she had brought 2 of her friends, and my kitchen had turned into a little factory. We played gospel music, laughed between batches, and for the first time in a long time, my house felt alive. By the end of that week, I had 200 bottles ready, not perfect, but made with love and determination. When I carried those boxes into the hotel's back entrance, the same place I used to clock in with a mop and bucket, I swear I almost cried. The staff who used to pass me by without a hello stopped and stared. Lucille, one of the maids asked, what you doing back here? I smiled and said, delivering my first order. She blinked, confused. Your order? I nodded, proud as I could be. Yep. The hotel's using my cleaning products now." Her jaw dropped, and that moment, that single look of surprise and admiration, felt like healing for every humiliation I'd ever swallowed. Mr. Collins met me in the storage room, checked the labels, nodded, and said, "Looks good. Let's see how they do." I walked out of there lighter than air, even though my hands were shaking from exhaustion. When I got home, I sat on my porch, watching the sun dip low, and whispered, "We did it, Mama." The cicadas buzzed, the neighborhood kids laughed, and I felt something new bloom inside me. Pride, not the kind that shouts, but the kind that sits quiet in your chest and says, "You're not done yet." I didn't know it then, but that order was just the beginning. Within a month, other hotels started calling, some because they heard about the product, others because they remembered that Maid with the homemade cleaner was still making every bottle by hand, still using the same little kitchen. But something in me had shifted. I wasn't chasing approval anymore. I was building something that had my name on it. It didn't take long for my little dream to turn into something bigger than I could handle. The orders started coming faster than I could fill them. First, it was one more hotel, then 3. Then a whole cleaning company from Atlanta called and asked for a monthly supply. At first I was excited, running around my house with a notebook, scribbling orders, trying to figure out where I'd even store all those bottles. But after a while, excitement turned into exhaustion. My kitchen wasn't built for this. My arms ached, the mixer burned out, and I ran out of money before I could buy more ingredients. I started sleeping on the couch because my bedroom was stacked high with boxes and bottles. I told myself it was temporary, but deep down I was scared. What if I'd taken on more than I could handle? What if I failed again, this time with the whole world watching? One evening, I got a call from Mr. Collins. "Mrs. Brown," he said, "we need a double shipment this month. Your product's a hit." I wanted to be happy, but my heart sank. Double. I could barely manage single. That night, I sat at my kitchen table with my calculator and bills spread out, tears running down my face. I didn't have enough money for supplies, and the bank had already said no to my loan. "We can't approve a business loan without collateral, Mrs. Brown," they told me, same tone, same pity in their eyes. I wanted to scream. I'd cleaned floors for people who didn't even know my name. And now when I finally had something of my own, the system still told me no. That week, I learned something about people. Success brings smiles, but it also brings snakes. One man showed up at my door, slick-talking, saying he could invest in my company. He wore a gold watch and smelled like trouble. "All you need to do, Miss Brown, is sin here. I'll handle production, distribution, everything. You'll be rich in no time." I almost fell for it. The thought of finally resting, letting someone else carry the load, was tempting, but something in my gut said no. I'd been invisible too long to hand my name over that easy. I smiled polite and told him I'd think about it, but when he left, I tore up his card and tossed it straight in the trash. Then came the worst blow. One of my biggest customers canceled an order without warning, saying their supplier offered cheaper products. I sat there, staring at the phone, feeling that old pain rise up, the one that whispered, "You were never meant for more." For 2 days, I couldn't mix, couldn't move. The house was too quiet, the air too heavy. It felt like I was slipping right back into the shadows I'd fought so hard to escape. But then Keisha came over, holding a tiny, handmade sign that said, "Lucille's Miracle Cleaners. We believe in you," she had written it in bright blue marker and taped a dollar bill under it. "That's your first investor," she said with a grin. I looked at her and realized maybe I didn't need banks or fancy suits. I just needed to keep believing, like that little girl did. So I started again. I took the last of my savings and bought just enough ingredients for a small batch. I began calling hotels myself, one by one. Some said no, some laughed, but a few, just a few, said yes. And those yeses were enough to keep me going. I mixed through the nights, hands blistered, eyes heavy, But my spirit refused to quit. Every bottle I made carried more than soap. It carried my story, my pride, my proof that a maid could rise without anyone's permission. I stopped thinking small that week. I told myself, "You've already cleaned floors for the rich. Now it's time to build something they'll buy from you." That became my new prayer, my new fight, and slowly, little by little, I started to rise again. I'll never forget the morning everything changed. It started out just like any other day, me in my robe, hair tied up, sipping coffee while checking orders on my old laptop. I still didn't even have a real office. My kitchen table was my headquarters, and the smell of lemon oil had become my perfume. Then my phone buzzed. It was a number I didn't recognize. I answered, half asleep, saying, "This is Lucille." A cheerful voice said, "Mrs. Brown, this is Dana from the Atlanta Times. We'd love to do a feature on your story, a former maid turned entrepreneur. Are you available for an interview?" For a second, I thought it was a prank. But when she said she'd heard about me from one of the hotels, my hands started shaking. Me on the news. Lord, I'd spent half my life being invisible now. Someone wanted to see me. When the article came out 2 weeks later, my whole world flipped upside down. The headline read, "From Maid's Mop to Brand, the Rise of Lucille Brown." It had a picture of me in my apron, smiling in front of a shelf full of my bottles. I thought a few people might read it, maybe some locals, maybe a few kind words from old friends. But I wasn't ready for what happened next. My phone didn't stop ringing for days. Stores from all over the state called asking to stock my products. Online orders flooded in faster than I could count. People sent letters, emails, and messages from everywhere. Women saying they felt inspired. Men saying they respected my hustle. Even old co-workers from the hotel saying, "Lucille, we always knew you had it in you." I didn't know how to handle all that attention. Reporters showed up outside my house. Photographers wanted pictures of me in my kitchen, the same space that used to feel too small for my dreams. I just laughed and said, "Y'all sure this the place you want to see? Ain't nothing fancy here but hard work." They smiled and told me that's exactly what people loved, the realness, the heart. That's when I realized something important. People weren't just buying my cleaner, they were buying my story. Every bottle was a reminder that struggle could turn into strength, and pain could polish a person like lemon on brass. With the sudden demand, I had to grow fast. I rented an old warehouse down the street, hired some of the same hotel maids who used to work beside me, women who knew what tired really felt like. "Lucille, you serious?" One of them asked when I offered her a job. I smiled and said, "Baby, we've cleaned other people's floors long enough. Time to clean our way to freedom." We laughed, cried, and prayed together as we set up that place. I could feel my mama's spirit in that building, proud and smiling down. A few months later, I signed a deal with a major retail chain. The first time I walked into a store and saw Lucille's Miracle Cleaners sitting on the shelf, I just stood there and stared. People passed by, grabbing bottles without knowing the face behind it, and that was fine. I didn't need them to know my pain. I just needed them to feel my purpose. I ran my fingers over the label, whispered, "We did it, Mama," and smiled so hard I thought my face might break. When the checks started rolling in, everyone from my past seemed to remember me. Old managers, ex-coworkers, even the ones who used to call me the cleaning lady who talks too much. Some congratulating, some pretending they'd always supported me. I didn't hold grudges. I'd been too poor, too tired, and too blessed to waste energy on bitterness. I just sent them all the same message. God's timing is perfect. I hope you're doing well. And I meant it, because at that point, I understood success isn't about revenge. It's about peace. And yet, deep inside, I couldn't help but think about the way people laughed at me when I said I'd make something of myself. The way they rolled their eyes told me I'd die a maid. Now, I was a millionaire, but not because I got lucky, because I refuse to let their voices drown out mine. Sometimes when I sit on my porch in the evenings, watching the sun sink behind the trees, I still hear the faint echo of hotel vacuum, cleaners and room service bells, ringing in my memory. Those sounds used to mean exhaustion and invisibility now. They remind me of how far I've come. My hands don't scrub floors anymore, but the scars on them still tell the story of every night I almost gave up. You know, people always ask me, Lucille, what's the secret? How did you turn it all around? And I tell them, the secret ain't fancy. It's faith, patience, and hard work when nobody's watching. Because truth be told, I didn't have investors or degrees or fancy equipment. All I had was a mop, a prayer, and the will to never let my worth be defined by a uniform. I go back to the Midtown Hotel sometimes, not as staff, but as a supplier. The new maids there smile when they see me walk in. They whisper, "That's her, the woman who used to clean these rooms." And every time I see their faces, I feel a deep kind of joy, not pride that shouts, but pride that hums quiet and steady in your chest. I talk to them, tell them to dream bigger, to save a little from every check, to believe that no matter where they start, they can change the ending. I even leave free samples of my products in their break room, not because I have to, but because I know what it feels like to be forgotten. Nobody deserves to stay invisible forever. These days, I have offices, employees, contracts, even accountants, all those words I used to hear in other people's worlds, scrubbing bathrooms and humming gospel songs to keep my spirit alive. My success didn't make me different. It just showed me who I always was. I see my bottles sitting in hotels, stores, and homes across the country. I don't just see cleaning products. I see every tear, every no, every time somebody laughed at me and said, "You'll always be just a maid." Well, maybe I was, but I was a maid with a dream, and that dream made me a millionaire. And to you, listening right now, I want you to remember something. Your story ain't over. No matter who doubted you, no matter how many doors closed, you've still got time to write your comeback. Don't ever let your age, your past, or your pain tell you that it's too late. If a 62-year-old maid can build an empire out of lemons and vinegar, then baby, you can build yours too. So before you scroll away, take a second. If my story touched you or made you believe again, go ahead and subscribe, because there's more where this came from. More voices like mine, more stories of faith, struggle, and victory. This is Lucille Brown, and this was my miracle.